A few minutes after his wife's funeral, a ruthless man kicked her beloved German Shepherd and her litter of puppies out onto the scorching pavement, laughing as they cried out in pain. He thought he was untouchable, but he didn't know a Navy SEAL was watching, and he was about to prove that the only thing more dangerous than a soldier at war is a soldier protecting the innocent. The Pennsylvania sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long, golden shadows across the meticulously manicured lawns of Bryn Mawr. It was a picturesque afternoon of the sort that real estate firms printed on postcards. Towering oak trees swayed gently in the humid breeze, the air thick with the scent of blooming hydrangeas. Inside the wrought iron gates of the Thorne estate, however, the air was thick with a cloying gloom that had nothing to do with the weather. The post-funeral reception was finally over. The last of the black sedans and luxury cars were rolling away down the gravel drive, carrying off the city's elite who had come to pay their disingenuous respects to Catherine Thorne. The sprawling, Tudor-style mansion, normally a beacon of warmth under Catherine's care, now felt cold and imposing, a stone fortress that concealed more secrets than it did a home. Marcus Thorne stood by the massive, oak double doors, watching the taillights of a city councilman's car disappear around a bend. At 45, Marcus was a man who wore his wealth like a second skin. He was undeniably handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a tailored Italian suit that accentuated his athletic build. His eyes, however, a pale, flat gray, held a permanent chill that no smile could ever thaw. He had spent the last 4 hours shaking hands, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, and accepting condolences for the wife he had ceased to love years ago. As the heavy gates hummed shut, sealing the estate from the outside world, Marcus's shoulders slumped, not with grief, but with the sheer exhaustion of maintaining a facade. He loosened his black tie, yanking it from his collar as if it were a noose, and turned back into the cool, air-conditioned foyer where the silence was deafening. A voice finally cut through the stillness, sharp and grating. Amber Lynn emerged from the shadows of the grand staircase, a half-empty champagne flute dangling from her hand. She was 28, a stark contrast to the somber mood of the day in a tight-fitting crimson dress that hugged every curve. Her blonde hair was styled in expensive, loose waves, and her makeup was flawless, though her expression was marred by a disdainful pout. Amber was the woman Marcus had been seeing for the last 2 years, a poorly kept secret. And now that Catherine was in the ground, she moved with the self-appointed authority of the new lady of the house. She walked to a velvet armchair and swiped aggressively at the skirt. "I told you I shouldn't have worn this silk," she complained, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged hall. "There's dog hair everywhere. Literally everywhere, Marcus. It's disgusting. How you lived in this zoo is beyond me." Marcus followed her gaze to the corner of the living room near the cold fireplace. There, lying on a large, orthopedic memory foam bed, was Sasha. She was a magnificent, 4-year-old German Shepherd, though today she looked much older. Her black and tan coat, usually glossy and well-brushed, was dull, and her head rested heavily on her front paws. Sasha was more than a pet. She had been Catherine's shadow, her protector, and her confidant during the long nights when Marcus was working late. The dog's amber eyes were full of sorrow, tracking Marcus's every move with a weary intelligence that spoke volumes. Tucked against Sasha's belly were 3 puppies, just 8 weeks old, sleeping in a pile of soft whimpers and twitching paws. They were the last joy Catherine had known before the cancer took her, and Sasha guarded them with a quiet, fierce devotion. "It's over now, Amber," Marcus said, walking to the wet bar to pour himself a stiff bourbon, ignoring the crystal decanter of water. "Catherine's gone. The house is ours." "Not with that beast staring at me," Amber snapped, pointing a manicured finger at Sasha. The dog didn't growl, but her ears flattened slightly, sensing the hostility radiating from the woman. "I am not living here with a shedding machine and 3 more that are about to get just as big. Look." Amber picked a single black hair off the hem of her dress and flicked it away as if it were toxic waste. "It smells like a wet animal in here. It's suffocating. You promised me, Marcus, you said things would change." Marcus looked at Amber, saw the petulance in her eyes, then looked at Sasha. He felt an irrational surge of anger toward the animal. The dog was a living, breathing reminder of Catherine, of her kindness, her patience, and the way she had looked at him with such disappointment in her final months. Sasha knew. Animals always knew. "You're right," Marcus muttered, the alcohol burning a trail down his throat, fueling the resentment he'd been suppressing all day. "I promised." He set his glass down hard on the marble countertop. The sound made Sasha flinch. Marcus strode across the room, his steps heavy and purposeful. "Get up," he commanded, his voice devoid of the fake warmth he'd used with the funeral guests. Sasha hesitated, her instinct to protect her sleeping pups warring with her training to obey. She whined low in her throat, a sound of confusion and appeal. Marcus didn't wait. He bent down and grabbed Sasha's thick leather collar, hauling her to her feet with unnecessary force. The sudden movement startled the puppies, who tumbled onto the floor, yelping in alarm. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Amber asked, though a cruel smile played on her lips. "Cleaning house," he grunted. He dragged Sasha toward the front door. The large dog scrabbled for purchase on the slick hardwood floors, her claws clicking frantically, but she didn't snap. She had been trained never to harm her master, even one so cruel. She looked back desperately at her pups, who were stumbling after her on wobbly legs, confused by the commotion. Marcus shoved the heavy front door open, letting the blistering heat of the afternoon flood the cool hallway. He pulled Sasha out onto the portico and shoved her down the steps. She landed awkwardly, her paws slipping on the flagstone. He went back, scooping up the 3 puppies in one arm as if they were nothing more than a bundle of dirty laundry, ignoring their terrified squeals, and marched down the driveway. The Pennsylvania sun was relentless, baking the asphalt and concrete of the driveway until it radiated heat like a furnace. Marcus didn't stop until he reached the heavy, wrought iron pedestrian gate. He tossed the puppies out onto the sidewalk beyond. They landed in a heap, crying out as the hot concrete seared their sensitive paw pads. "Get out!" Marcus snarled, pointing down the street at Sasha. "Go find some other fool to feed you." Sasha, panting from stress and heat, looked from Marcus to her crying pups. She was confused, scared, and heartbroken, but her maternal instincts were overriding everything else. She didn't run. Instead, she turned back toward the open gate. Her bed, the thick, soft cushion Catherine had bought for her, was just inside the garage, visible from where they stood. She needed to get them off the hot ground. She needed to get them to safety. With a determined whine, Sasha tried to dart past Marcus, her eyes fixed, not on the house, but on the shade of the garage and the bed. It wasn't an attack. It was an attempt to salvage a shred of comfort for her litter. "Oh, no you don't!" Marcus roared. The animal's audacity infuriated him. As Sasha tried to slip past his legs, Marcus drew his foot back. He was wearing expensive dress shoes, hard-soled leather. He kicked out with all his strength, connecting squarely with Sasha's ribcage. The sound was sickening, a dry thump followed by the sharp crack of breaking bone. Sasha screamed, a sound of pure agony that tore through the quiet, upscale neighborhood. The force of the kick lifted her off the ground and sent her tumbling onto the sidewalk beside her pups. She convulsed, struggling for breath, her legs scrambling for a moment as pain flooded her system. From the porch, Amber laughed, covering her mouth in a mockery of shock. "Don't scuff your shoes." Marcus ignored her, his face flushed with exertion and malice. He stepped out of the gate, towering over the injured dog. He raised his foot again, this time aiming for her head, intent on finishing the message. Sasha saw the motion. Her vision was blurring with pain, and every breath felt like a knife in her chest, but she saw the man's shadow fall over her pups. The puppies were huddled together, shivering despite the heat, terrified by the noise and violence. Defying her own broken body, Sasha dragged herself forward. She didn't run. She didn't cringe. She covered the 3 puppies with her own body, curling around them like a shield, exposing her back and flank to the man who had promised to care for her. She closed her eyes and braced for the impact, letting out a low, mournful whimper that was not a plea for mercy, but a final act of love for her young. Marcus hesitated. Even in his rage, the sight of the animal's absolute self-sacrifice gave him pause. Or perhaps it was the passing car that had slowed, the driver looking on with curiosity. He lowered his foot, straightened his jacket, and stepped back inside the estate. "Good riddance," he muttered. He took hold of the iron gate and slammed it shut. The metallic clang echoed like a gunshot, sealing the barrier between the life Sasha had known and the harsh, unforgiving world she was now cast into. Inside, Marcus turned his back, walking up the drive where Amber was waiting with open arms. Outside, on the blistering concrete under the unforgiving Pennsylvania sun, Sasha lay trembling, her breaths shallow and ragged, her body a protective dome over her whimpering puppies as the world drove by, indifferent to their plight. The Schuylkill Expressway was a parking lot, a glittering serpent of chrome and glass reflecting the unyielding afternoon sun. Jack Renner tapped his fingers on the cracked steering wheel of his 1999 Dodge Ram. The rhythmic drumming was the only outward sign of his mounting impatience. The truck, a faded navy blue beast that had seen better decades, rumbled with a low, throaty idle that vibrated through the soles of his boots. Jack was 32, a man made of hard muscle and sharp angles, with a face that bore the subtle weather map of high-altitude jumps and desert deployments. His hair was buzzed short in a military cut, and his eyes, a sharp hazel, swept his surroundings with the habitual, heightened awareness he couldn't turn off, even on leave. He wasn't supposed to be here, stuck in traffic in a wealthy Philadelphia suburb. He was supposed to be at his parents' cabin in the Poconos, enjoying the quiet, but a last-minute errand for his sister had dragged him down toward the city, and now he was paying the price in gridlock. Needing an escape, Jack wrenched the wheel to the right, guiding the truck off the main highway and onto the winding, tree-lined streets of the exclusive residential area, hoping to cut through the neighborhood and bypass the worst of the jam. The neighborhood was another world, quiet and pristine. Massive wrought iron gates guarded driveways worth more than Jack made in a decade, and the landscaping was so perfect it looked artificial. He rolled his window down, letting the hot, humid air circulate in the cab, his elbow resting on the frame as he navigated the gentle curves of the road. It was quiet here, unnervingly so, until his eyes snagged on something dark, a break in the uniform gray of the sidewalk ahead. At first, his brain registered it as a discarded bag of mulch or trash, an anomaly in such a well-tended place. But as the truck rolled closer, the shape moved. It was a slight, shuddering motion, followed by a small, pale shape that tumbled away from the larger mass. Jack's instincts, honed in combat zones where identifying a threat or a casualty in a split second meant the difference between life and death, kicked in instantly. That wasn't trash. That was a living thing, and it was in trouble. He slammed on the brakes, the old truck lurching to a stop at the curb, tires chirping on the hot asphalt. Jack killed the engine and jumped out of the truck, his boots hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. The heat radiating off the ground was intense, a physical weight against his skin, and he knew the danger of it immediately. He approached the scene, his jaw tightening as the full horror of the situation became clear. A German shepherd, large and clearly of noble breeding, was sprawled on the concrete. Her breathing was shallow and ragged, each intake accompanied by a wet, clicking sound that suggested internal trauma. Blood trickled from her nose, pooling in a dark, sticky circle on the white concrete. But it was the dog's movement that stopped Jack cold, that made his chest seize with a sharp, fierce pang of empathy. Despite her obvious agony, she was stretching her neck, her tongue lapping, trying desperately to lick 3 tiny, whimpering puppies who were crawling blindly over her belly. The puppies were crying, a high-pitched sound of distress as the searing sidewalk burned their unprotected paws. The mother was using her own body as a mat, trying to pull them onto her fur to save them from the heat, absorbing the burn so they wouldn't have to. "Hey girl, easy now," Jack murmured, his voice dropping to the low, gentle register he used to soothe a panicked recruit or a frightened animal. He knelt beside them, ignoring the heat searing through the knees of his jeans. He reached out, his big, calloused hand hovering over the dog's flank. He didn't touch her right away, letting her get his scent, letting her see he wasn't there to harm her. The dog's eyes, glazed with pain and shock, rolled toward him. She tried to lift her head to growl, a final, valiant effort to protect her young, but she had no strength left. Her head fell back with a soft thud. "I've got you," Jack whispered, gently moving one of the puppies off the hot cement and onto the cool grass of the verge. He worked quickly, efficiently, moving the other 2 into the shade before turning his attention back to the mother. He laid a hand on her chest, feeling the frantic, irregular beat of her heart. Her ribs felt wrong under his fingers, indented and shifting in a way that screamed fracture. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a dog that had been hit by a car and crawled here. The injuries were localized, specific. Someone had done this. The sound of an electronic lock disengaging drew Jack's attention to the massive gate that loomed over them. The heavy iron gate swung inward, and a man stepped out, looking more annoyed than concerned. It was Marcus Thorne. Up close, Marcus looked even more polished and artificial than he did from a distance. His silk shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He looked at Jack, a stranger in faded jeans and a plain t-shirt kneeling on his sidewalk, with a mixture of contempt and irritation. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus demanded, his voice dripping with entitlement. "I saw you on the camera. You're blocking my driveway with that piece of junk." He didn't even look at the dog. He looked through her, as if she were a pile of leaves he was waiting for the gardener to sweep away. The callousness of it, the absolute void of humanity in the man's eyes, triggered a cold, hard knot of fury deep in Jack's gut. It was the kind of anger that didn't make him yell. It made him deadly quiet. Jack rose slowly, his 6'2" frame unfolding until he towered over the other man. He didn't step back. He stepped forward, moving into Marcus's personal space with a deliberate, predatory grace. "This dog needs a vet," Jack said, his voice flat, emotionless, but heavy with implication. "She's got broken ribs, probably bleeding internally, and her pups are cooking to death." "What do you know about it?" Marcus scoffed, taking a sip of his drink, emboldened by the security camera on the iron gate behind him. It's a stray, a nuisance. I kicked it out and it wouldn't leave. If you're so concerned, call animal control, but get the hell off my property before I call the cops and have you arrested for trespassing." Marcus made a shooing motion with his hand, a gesture meant to dismiss Jack like a fly. "Go on, get out of here." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Jack looked at Marcus's expensive shoes, then at the dying dog, and the connection was made. The footprint of violence was invisible, but it was palpable. Jack's eyes narrowed, the hazel hardening to cold steel. He took another step, closing the distance until he could smell the expensive scotch on Marcus's breath. Marcus hesitated, his arrogance cracking as he looked up into the face of a man who had hunted insurgents in the mountains of Afghanistan. He saw something in Jack's eyes that terrified him. A promise of violence that was disciplined, controlled, and absolute. "You kicked her," Jack stated. It wasn't a question. A helpless animal, a mother. It's my property," Marcus stammered, taking a step back, the heel of his shoe clicking on the stone driveway. "I can do whatever I want. It's just a dog." "One," Jack said softly, holding up a single finger. "You're going to step aside and let me get them in my truck." He looked Marcus dead in the eye, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a low growl that vibrated in Marcus's chest. "Two," Jack continued, "I'm going to give you a first-hand lesson in what it feels like to have your ribs broken and be left to cook on the asphalt." He tilted his head slightly, his expression unchanging. "And believe me, it will take the police a lot longer to get here than it will take me to finish." Marcus's face went pale. The glass in his hand trembled, the ice cubes clinking together in the silence. He looked at his gate, then back at Jack, and realized with a primal surge of fear that this stranger was not bluffing. This was not a suburban dad having a bad day. This was a wolf at the door. "Take them," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. "Just take the damn things and go." He backed away quickly, retreating through the gate and hitting the button to close it, disappearing into his fortress like a coward. Jack didn't waste a second watching him go. He turned back to the dogs, his demeanor instantly shifting from menacing to gentle. He ran back to his truck, dropping the tailgate and clearing a space on the back seat of the extended cab. He grabbed a thick wool blanket from his emergency kit and returned to the sidewalk. "Okay, Mama. This is gonna hurt a little, but I've got you," he murmured. He carefully scooped up the puppies first, placing them in a cardboard box he had in the truck bed, then carried the box into the cab, setting it on the floor where the vents would blow on them. Then came the hard part. He knelt beside Sasha, sliding his arms under her chest and hips, trying to distribute the weight evenly to minimize the pressure on her ribs. Sasha cried out, a sharp, pained yelp as he lifted her, her head lolling against his shoulder, her tongue flicking out to taste the salt on his neck in a gesture of submission and trust. Jack gritted his teeth, absorbing her pain as his own, and carried her to the truck. He gently laid her on the back seat, positioning her so she could see the box with her puppies. He slammed the door, locking the cool air inside, and ran around to the driver's side. As he climbed in, he cranked the air conditioning to full blast. The rush of cold air hit his face, a stark contrast to the searing heat outside. He looked in the rearview mirror. Sasha was panting, her eyes fluttering, but she was watching him. Jack put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the Thorn estate and the coward behind its gates in his dust. He didn't know where he was going yet. He just knew he had to find a vet, and he had to do it fast. His hand reached back blindly, his fingers finding the dog's coarse fur. "You're safe now," he promised, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I'm not leaving you." The old Dodge rumbled down the road, carrying 5 beating hearts away from a nightmare and toward an uncertain but hopeful horizon. The tires of the Dodge Ram squealed as Jack swung the heavy truck into the parking lot of the Main Line Veterinary Hospital. It was a sleek, modern building with floor-to-ceiling glass windows that reflected the fading orange light of the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the messy, gritty reality inside the truck's cab. Jack didn't bother parking perfectly. He straddled 2 lines near the emergency entrance, killed the engine, and was out the door before the dust had settled. He grabbed the box of puppies first, tucking it securely under one arm, then went back for Sasha. The German Shepherd was nearly unconscious now, her breathing shallow and wet. A sickening rattle vibrated up into Jack's chest as he lifted her. She didn't cry out this time. She was past the point of audible pain, drifting into a dangerous lethargy that sent a spike of fear through Jack's heart. He kicked the clinic door open with his boot, storming into the cool, antiseptic-smelling lobby like a whirlwind. "I need help," he barked, his voice loud and commanding, cutting through the quiet hum of the waiting room. "Trauma case, broken ribs, possible internal bleeding." A woman behind the reception desk looked up, startled, but before she could speak, a set of double doors behind her flew open. Dr. Emily Carter stepped out, alerted by the commotion. Emily was 30, a woman of sharp intelligence and no-nonsense efficiency with dark, curly hair pulled up in a messy bun and keen green eyes that missed nothing. She wore navy blue scrubs that had already seen a long day, and a stethoscope was slung casually around her neck. She and Jack had known each other since high school. She was one of the few people who knew the man behind the soldier, the quiet boy who used to rescue injured birds before he became a man who hunted insurgents. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second when she saw Jack, covered in sweat and dog fur, but her professionalism took over instantly. "Exam room 1, now," she ordered, signaling for a vet tech to follow. "Jack, get her on the metal table. Jenny, get oxygen and the crash cart. Let's go." The next 20 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Jack laid Sasha down on the stainless steel table, the cold surface a shock to the overheated animal. Emily worked with fluid precision, her hands moving over the dog's body with a mixture of tenderness and clinical detachment. She listened to her lungs, checked the color of her gums, which were alarmingly pale, and palpated her abdomen. "She's in shock," Emily announced, her voice tight. "Pulse is thready. I can feel crepitus on the right side. Multiple rib fractures. One might have punctured a lung. We need x-rays and an ultrasound, stat." She looked up at Jack, her green eyes serious. "Jack, this is bad. She needs emergency surgery to stabilize her chest wall and check for internal damage. It's going to be expensive, and I can't guarantee she'll make it." Jack didn't blink. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a black credit card, and slapped it down on the counter beside the medical trays. "Do whatever you have to do, Emily," he said, his voice allowing for no argument. "Save her. Money is not the issue." Emily nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "All right, Jenny, get the puppies to the care unit, get them hydrated and check them for burns. Jack, you need to wait outside. We have to intubate her, now." As the team swarmed the table to wheel Sasha into the surgical suite, Emily paused, her hand hovering over the dog's neck. "I need to get this off," she said, unbuckling the thick leather collar Sasha was wearing to clear her airway. She handed it to Jack. "Hold on to this. I'll come out when I know something." The doors swung shut, leaving Jack standing alone in the abrupt silence of the hallway, the warm leather of the collar heavy in his clenched fist. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed doors, the adrenaline slowly draining away to be replaced by a cold, simmering rage for the man who had done this. Jack walked back to the waiting area, which was empty except for a gently bubbling fish tank in the corner. He sank into one of the plastic chairs, his body heavy with exhaustion. He laid the collar across his lap. It was an old thing. Thick, high-quality brown leather, darkened with oils and age, with a brass nameplate elegantly engraved with the name Sasha. It looked like something from another era, well cared for but undeniably old. Jack ran his thumb over the leather, a habit from his days as a sniper, keeping his hands busy to keep his mind sharp. As his fingers traced the inside lining of the collar, he felt a ridge. It was subtle, something a casual touch would miss, but Jack's fingers were trained to find tripwires in the dark. He frowned, picking the collar up to examine it under the bright fluorescent lights of the waiting room. The stitching on the inside of the collar was inconsistent. The original thread was a thick, waxed nylon that had yellowed with age. But along a 2-inch section near the buckle, the thread was slightly different, black, a little thinner, and the pattern was a hand stitch, not machine. It was either a sloppy repair or a concealment. Jack's curiosity piqued. He pulled a small, black multi-tool from his belt, flipping out a short, razor-sharp blade. With the care of a surgeon, he sliced through the black threads, peeling back the soft felt padding that lined the leather. Something glinted in the light. Tucked neatly between the leather and the padding, wrapped in a thin layer of plastic wrap, was a tiny black rectangle, a micro SD card. Jack's heart rate kicked up a notch. This wasn't just a dog collar. It was a hiding place. He worked the card free, his mind racing. Why would someone hide a memory card in a dog's collar? He thought of Marcus Thorne's arrogance, the way he treated the dog as property, and the fear in his eyes when Jack had confronted him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It was a rugged, tactical model he used for work, equipped with various ports for field data extraction. He slotted the micro SD card into the reader on the side and waited. A file folder popped up on the screen. It contained a single video file, dated 2 weeks prior, just days before the obituary he'd read in the paper said Catherine Thorne had passed away. He hit play. The video was shaky at first, the angle low and awkward, as if the phone had been propped on a bookshelf or table. Then, a woman's face came into frame. It was Catherine Thorne. She looked nothing like the vibrant socialite Jack had seen in old newspaper clippings. She was gaunt, her skin thin and pale, the ravages of a terminal illness obvious in the hollows of her cheeks. But her eyes were bright, burning with a desperate intensity. She was sitting in a sunroom, Sasha's head resting in her lap. Catherine was stroking the dog's ears with a trembling hand. "If you're watching this," Catherine's voice whispered from the phone's speaker, thin and reedy, "then I'm gone, and Marcus has tried to get rid of Sasha." Jack leaned forward, shielding the screen with his hand, the world around him shrinking to the woman on the tiny display. "He thinks I don't know," Catherine continued, coughing lightly. "He thinks I don't know about that woman, about the gambling debts, about the way he kicks Sasha when he thinks I'm asleep." Her voice broke, and she paused to wipe away a tear. "He's been pressuring me to sign a new will, one that gives him everything immediately. He threatened me yesterday. He said if I didn't sign, he'd put Sasha and the puppies in a sack and throw them in the river." Jack tightened his grip on the phone until his knuckles were white. On screen, the camera jerked as a door slammed in the background of the video. Catherine looked terrified, her eyes darting to the side. A muffled voice, Marcus's, could be heard yelling from another room, "Catherine, where are the damn papers?" Catherine leaned closer to the camera, whispering urgently, "I've hidden the real will now. The one my lawyer drew up before Marcus fired him. He can't find it. He'll never find it where it really is." She took a breath. "This collar? It's the key. Not the card, the collar itself is the misdirection. The key to safe deposit box 404 at First National Bank is sewn into Sasha's other collar, the red one, which I've buried in the rose garden under the hydrangeas. But this card, this is my testimony. This is proof of his abuse. Use it to save my dogs. Please." The video abruptly cut to black as the door in the background was thrown open. Jack sat back, the air leaving his lungs in a rush. He stared at the black screen, then at the doors to the surgical suite. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a cruel man. He was a monster who had terrorized a dying woman and was now trying to erase the only witnesses to his cruelty. The property Marcus was so desperate to reclaim wasn't just an animal. It was the repository for a fortune and the evidence of his crimes. Jack ejected the card and slipped it into his secure shirt pocket, buttoning the flap closed. He looked at the old leather collar on his lap with a newfound respect. It wasn't just a piece of leather anymore. It was the last plea for justice from a dead woman. And Jack Renner had never ignored a plea for help in his life. The door to the surgical suite opened, and Emily stepped out, looking exhausted, pulling her mask down. Jack stood up, his face set like stone. He had a fight on his hands now, and he knew exactly who the enemy was. The morning mist rolled in from the Schuylkill River, clinging to the brick row houses of Jack Renner's modest Manayunk neighborhood. It was a world away from the manicured, suffocating luxury of Bryn Mawr. Here, the air smelled of industry and damp pavement, and the only sounds were the distant rumble of the elevated train and the cry of gulls. Inside the living room, which Jack had converted into a makeshift recovery ward, the peace was fragile. It had been 48 hours since the surgery, and Sasha was alive. She lay on a thick pile of blankets near the sliding glass door, a large, shaved and stitched patch on her flank where the surgeon had repaired her ribs and drained the fluid from her chest. She was weak, her movements slow and stiff, but her eyes had lost the distant, glazed look of shock. They were fixed on Jack, tracking him with a mixture of gratitude and protective vigilance as he moved around the kitchen making coffee. The 3 puppies, now clean and fed, were a fluffy pile in a makeshift pen Jack had built from scrap lumber, safe from the dangers of the world. Jack sipped his black coffee, leaning against the counter, and watched the sunrise paint the water shades of pink and gold. He hadn't slept much. His mind was still processing the video on the memory card. Catherine Thorne's trembling voice, the fear in her eyes, the revelation of a hidden will. He had secured the card in a safe deposit box of his own the day before, but the knowledge it contained was like a live grenade in his pocket. He knew Marcus Thorne wouldn't let this go easily. Men like Marcus, men who kicked dogs and terrorized their dying wives, were driven by control. Losing Sasha wasn't just losing a pet. It was losing control of Catherine's legacy. Jack walked over to Sasha, kneeling slowly so as not to startle her. "How are we doing today, girl?" he whispered, offering her a piece of cooked chicken from his hand. Sasha sniffed it delicately before taking it, her tail giving a single, weak thump against the floor. It was a small victory, but to Jack, it felt like winning a battle. Meanwhile, 20 miles north, the mood in the Thorne estate was toxic. The morning light did nothing to warm the cold, marble-floored study where Marcus sat behind his desk, nursing a headache that had lasted for 2 days. Amber Lynn was pacing the room, the sharp click of her heels on the floor a sound that was grating on Marcus's last nerve. She was no longer wearing the mask of the grieving companion. She was panicking. "I'm telling you, Marcus," I remember her saying it, Amber insisted, stopping to glare at him. The old woman was confused, but she was specific. "About a month ago, she was holding that ratty old leather collar, and she looked right at me and said, 'This is worth more than the house.' I thought she just meant sentimental value. But now, with the will missing," she slammed her hand on the desk. "You threw away the key, Marcus. You literally kicked a fortune out onto the street." Marcus rubbed his temples, his face pale. He hadn't thought about the collar. He hadn't thought about anything but getting the animals out of his sight. It was just a piece of leather, Amber. She was probably hallucinating. "And what if she wasn't?" Amber shot back, her voice shrill. "If an account number or a key was in that collar, we have to get it back." Marcus swore, grabbing his phone. He had anticipated complications, which was why he had made a call the previous afternoon. As if on cue, the heavy oak door to the study opened, and the butler ushered in a man who looked entirely out of place in the elegant room. Mickey Corrigan was a private investigator, though the title seemed too formal for him. He was a short, wiry man with a complexion that suggested he spent too much time in smoky bars and not enough in the sun. He wore a brown suit that was a size too big for him, and his eyes darted around constantly, assessing the value of everything in the room before settling on Marcus. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply dropped a manila folder on the mahogany desk. "Found him," Corrigan said, his voice a dry rasp, like dead leaves rubbing together. "Wasn't hard. He's not exactly hiding. The plate from your neighbor's security camera came back to a Jack Renner. Former Navy SEAL, currently inactive, on leave." Corrigan smirked, revealing yellowed teeth. "You picked a fight with a heavy hitter, Mr. Thorne. This guy's no suburban dogwalker. He's a trained killer." Marcus opened the folder, staring at Jack's military ID photo. The man in the picture looked even more intense than the one who had confronted him in the driveway. "I don't care who he is," Marcus snapped, trying to summon the arrogance that usually sustained him. "He has my property." "Where is he?" Corrigan pointed to an address on the sheet. "Manayunk. Got a little row house down by the river. His truck's parked out front right now." Marcus felt a surge of triumph. He had a name. He had a location. He picked up the desk phone, dialing the number Corrigan had listed for Jack's landline, a number connected to the rental property. He needed to establish dominance before sending in lawyers or police. He needed to scare this soldier into submission. Back in the row house, the silence was broken by the shrill ring of the landline on the kitchen wall. Jack froze. Only a handful of people had this number. His sister, his parents, and the rental company. He slowly put his coffee cup down, his instincts flaring. Sasha lifted her head, her ears swiveling toward the sound. Jack walked over and picked up the receiver, saying nothing, just breathing evenly into the line. "Mr. Renner," a sneering voice said on the other end. It was a voice Jack recognized instantly, the oily, entitled tone of Marcus Thorne. "I assume you're enjoying your little vacation with my stolen property." Jack didn't flinch. He leaned against the wall, watching the river roll by. "I have no stolen property," Jack replied, his voice calm, even, and dangerously low. "I have a severely injured animal I rescued from an abuser. There's a difference." "Don't play word games with me, soldier boy," Marcus snarled, his confidence bolstered by the distance between them. "I know who you are. I know where you are. That dog is legally mine. It's registered to the Thorne estate. And more importantly, it was wearing a collar, a leather collar. I want it back, now." Jack's eyes flicked to the drawer where he had temporarily stashed the collar after removing the card. "So, they knew, or at least they suspected." "The collar is evidence," Jack said. "Just like the x-rays of her shattered ribs, just like the witness testimony of you kicking her." "I have lawyers who can bury you so deep you'll never see the sun," Marcus shouted, losing his composure. "You're a thief. You broke onto my gated property. You trespassed and you stole a valuable asset. If you don't have that dog and the collar back at my house by noon, I'm pressing charges. Grand larceny, I'll ruin your military career. Do you hear me? I will take everything from you." Jack pulled the phone from his ear and hit the speaker button. He held the receiver down toward the floor, toward the blanket where Sasha was lying. "Tell him, Sasha," Jack whispered. "Tell him what we think of his threats." From the floor, a sound rumbled, primal and terrifying. Hearing Marcus's voice, the voice that had screamed at her, the voice that preceded the pain, had lit a spark in the injured dog. The hair along Sasha's spine rose in a jagged ridge. She didn't whimper. She didn't cringe. Instead, a low, deep growl started deep in her chest, rising in volume until it became a pure, unadulterated warning snarl. It was the sound of a predator recognizing its enemy. It was a sound that promised violence if that enemy ever came near her pups again. Marcus was silent on the other end. The ferocity of the growl transmitted clearly through the speaker, a stark reminder that his property was a living creature with teeth and a memory. Jack brought the phone back to his ear. "You hear that?" he said, his voice as cold as the bottom of the river. "She doesn't sound like she wants to come home. And as for your threats, save them. If you want this dog or anything else, don't send a private detective. Don't send your lawyers." Jack paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You come yourself. Bring a warrant. Bring the police. Because if you set foot on my porch without a court order, I won't treat you like a civilian. I'll treat you like a threat." You can't," Marcus stammered. "Bring a warrant, Marcus," Jack repeated, cutting him off. "Or stay the hell away." He slammed the receiver back into its cradle, the plastic cracking against the wall. Silence flooded the room, but the energy had shifted. It was no longer just peaceful. It was fortified. Jack looked down at Sasha. The growl had subsided, but she was still alert, her head held high. She looked at Jack and he nodded. "Good girl," he said softly. He went to his laptop bag and pulled out the business card of a military lawyer he'd served with, a man who hated bullies almost as much as Jack did. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to go to war. The midday sun beat down on the sidewalks of Manayunk, baking the humid, river air until it shimmered. Inside Jack's row house, the air conditioner hummed a steady, monotonous drone, battling the heat. Jack grabbed his keys and a reusable canvas bag from the kitchen counter. He looked down at Sasha, lying on her orthopedic bed, her eyes tracking his every move. She was healing, the swelling on her side was going down, but she was still fragile. "I'll be back in 20, Jack told her, his voice low and reassuring. "Need to get more puppy food and some antiseptic for your stitches. You hold down the fort." Sasha blinked slowly, a gesture of acknowledgement, and rested her chin on her paws. The 3 puppies, now named Rocky, Libby, and Frankie by Jack in a fit of local pride, were asleep in a jumbled pile of soft bellies and paws in their pen. Jack double-checked the lock on the front door, glanced at the monitor for the security system he'd hastily installed the day before, and stepped out into the glare. He climbed into his truck and rumbled off, leaving the house seemingly quiet and vulnerable. 2 blocks away, a rust-colored sedan that had been idling for the past hour shifted into gear. Inside were 2 men who looked like they belonged on a wanted poster for petty theft. Driving was Dom, a skinny, nervous man in his late 20s with a scorpion tattoo on his neck and restless eyes that constantly checked the rearview mirror. In the passenger seat was Brick, a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a slow, dull demeanor that belied a capacity for brutal violence. They were local muscle, the kind of guys who didn't ask questions as long as the cash was paid up front. Mickey Corrigan, the pie, had given them $500 each with the promise of another $1,000 if they brought back a leather dog collar and gave the homeowner a warning. "He's gone," Dom said, watching the blue Dodge truck turn the corner. Corrigan said the guy's ex-military, so we gotta be quick. In and out. Grab the collar. Maybe mess the place up a little to send a message. Brick cracked his knuckles, a sound like drywood snapping. "What about the dog?" He grunted. Corrigan said it's half dead, Dom sneered, pulling into the alley behind Jack's house. "Broken ribs. Can't even walk. This is an easy job, Brick. Easy money." They slipped through the back gate, the simple latch easily defeated by Dom's tension tool. The backyard was small, mostly concrete and a few potted plants. They moved to the sliding glass door at the rear of the house. It was locked, but it was an old mechanism. Dom worked a flathead screwdriver into the track and shoved. With a groan of protesting metal, the lock broke and the door slid open. The cool air from inside hit them, smelling of coffee and dog shampoo. They stepped inside, their heavy boots loud on the hardwood floor. "Find the collar," Dom hissed. "Check the kitchen counter. The tables." Brick lumbered toward the living room, his eyes scanning for anything valuable to pocket on the way. Sasha had heard them the moment they touched the back gate. Her ears shot up and her body went rigid, a sharp pang of pain shooting through her healing ribs. But Sasha wasn't just a pampered pet. Before she was Marcus's neglected ornament, she had been Catherine's shadow. Catherine Thorne hadn't just been a socialite. In her younger days, she had been a civilian trainer for the local police K-9 unit, a fact Marcus had conveniently forgotten or never bothered to learn. She had raised Sasha with the discipline of a working dog. Sasha knew the commands for watch, hold, and quiet. Even in the haze of her injuries, the training took over. She didn't bark immediately. Barking gave away position. Instead, she let out a low, sharp chuff. A specific command Catherine had used. The puppies, startled awake, scrambled to their feet. Rocky, the bravest, opened his mouth to yelp, but Sasha nudged him hard with her nose, pushing him back behind her flank. She herded the three of them into the corner behind the sofa, placing herself between them and the intruders. When Brick entered the living room, he was expecting to see a cowering, sick animal. What he saw brought him up short. Sasha was on her feet, her legs trembling with the effort, and her shaved flank was exposed, red and angry. But her head was low, the hackles raised in a formidable ridge along her spine. She wasn't growling. She was staring at him with a silent, predatory intensity that set off a primal alarm in Brick's brain. "Dom," Brick whispered, not taking his eyes off the dog. "That dog ain't half dead." Dom came in, holding a crowbar he'd pulled from his waistband. "It's injured, you idiot. Just kick it if it gets close." He moved toward the kitchen counter where Jack's keys and wallet usually sat, assuming the collar might be there. Sasha moved. She didn't charge. She couldn't, but she snapped her jaws, a sound like a trap slamming shut, and took a single step forward, effectively blocking the path to the hallway and the rest of the house. Then she barked, a deep, booming sound that vibrated the walls, a distress signal designed to alert the pack leader. "Shut it up!" Dom yelled, panicking. He raised the crowbar and advanced on Sasha. "I'll cave its head in." Sasha didn't back down. She braced herself, ready to take the blow to protect the whimpering puppies behind her. Suddenly, the front door clicked. It wasn't a kick or a slam. It was the quiet, precise sound of a key turning and a deadbolt sliding back. Jack had forgotten his wallet. He'd driven half a block, realized it, and turned around. He had seen the unfamiliar car in the alley. He had seen the back gate ajar. He didn't pull into his driveway. He parked down the street and approached on foot, as silent as a ghost. The front door swung open and Jack stepped inside. He took in the situation in a fraction of a second. The busted back door, the two men, the raised crowbar, and Sasha standing her ground despite the pain. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate. If Sasha was the shield, Jack was the sword. "Put it down," Jack said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a kinetic energy that made the air feel heavy. Dom spun around, startled. "Who the hell are you?" he yelled, trying to bluff his way out. "This is a robbery, man." "Back off or he never finished. Jack closed the distance between them with a speed that defied his size. He didn't throw a punch like a brawler. He moved like water. As Dom swung the crowbar, Jack stepped inside the arc, his left hand catching Dom's wrist and twisting it sharply outward. There was a sickening pop, and the crowbar clattered to the floor. In the same fluid motion, Jack swept Dom's leg out from under him, sending him crashing face first onto the hardwood. Brick roared and charged, swinging a heavy fist. Jack didn't even look taxed. He ducked under the haymaker, pivoting on his heel to drive his elbow backward into Brick's solar plexus. The air left Brick's lungs in a whoosh. He doubled over and Jack finished it with a precise, controlled knee to the face, knocking the huge man unconscious before he even hit the ground. It was over in 10 seconds. 2 intruders were neutralized, and Jack hadn't even broken a sweat. Dom was groaning on the floor, cradling his wrist. Jack put a boot on the man's back, pinning him easily, and pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police right away. First, he opened the app for the security cameras he had installed in the corners of the living room. Tiny black lenses that the hired thugs had been too stupid to notice. He reviewed the footage, crystal clear shots of the break-in, the weapon, and the threat to the dog. He saved the clip to the cloud and emailed a copy to his military lawyer contact. Then, he hit the speed dial for the local police precinct. "You picked the wrong house," Jack whispered down at Dom, his boot pressing harder between the man's shoulder blades. "And you definitely picked the wrong dog." Sasha, seeing the threat neutralized, finally let her legs give way. She sat down hard, panting. Jack knelt beside her, one hand still on Dom's back, the other stroking Sasha's head. "I've got it from here, Mama," he soothed. "You did good. You did real good." Sasha licked his hand, her tail giving a single, weak wag. The puppies, sensing the shift in tension, poked their heads out from behind the sofa, yapping at the unconscious bulk of Brick. 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars were flashing red and blue in the driveway. The officers were hauling Dom and Brick away in handcuffs. Jack stood on his porch giving a statement to a sergeant he knew. "They were looking for something," Jack said, handing over a USB drive with the security footage. "And I know who sent them." He watched the patrol car pull away, his jaw set. This wasn't just harassment anymore. Marcus Thorne had escalated to home invasion and assault. Jack went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor next to Sasha's bed. He pulled the leather collar, the real target, from the small safe he'd bolted to the floor in his closet. He looked at the hidden memory card slot. He wants this so bad, Jack murmured to Sasha, who was finally relaxing into sleep. Let's see how much he likes it when a judge sees it. The battle lines had been drawn in the sand, but Marcus had made a fatal error. He thought he was fighting one man. He didn't realize he was fighting a pack. The glow from the television screen cast long, flickering shadows across Jack Renner's living room, the only light in the darkened house. On screen, the logo for Philly Tonight spun in flashy 3D graphics before cutting to the studio, where two people sat in plush beige armchairs opposite a sympathetic host. Jennifer Tate, the host, was a woman in her 40s with hair sprayed into an immobile blonde helmet and a practiced look of concern she wore like thick foundation. She leaned forward, clasping her hands as the camera zoomed in on her guests. Sitting there, looking the picture of bereaved domesticity, were Marcus Thorne and Amber Lynn. Marcus had traded his sharp Italian suits for a soft, navy blue cashmere sweater that made him look vulnerable. Approachable. He held Amber's hand tightly in his lap. Amber, for her part, was dressed in a demure black suit and pearl earrings, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. To the uninitiated, they were a grieving couple under attack. To Jack, they were sharks circling in a tank. It's been a nightmare, Jennifer, Marcus said, his voice cracking with rehearsed perfection. My late wife, Catherine, passed away only days ago. Sasha, our German shepherd, was her soulmate. She's the last living piece of Catherine the first have left. He paused, bowing his head as if overcome with emotion. And then this man, this violent individual, he tore our gate down. He was screaming incoherently about war and missions. I was terrified. He assaulted me, threw me to the ground, and dragged the poor animal and her puppies into his truck. I tried to stop him, but I'm not a soldier. I'm just a widower trying to mourn. Amber chimed in, her voice trembling. He was so big, and he had this look in his eye, like he wanted to hurt us. We found out later he's a former Navy SEAL. It's terrifying to think someone trained to kill is out there holding our poor dog captive. We just want Sasha home. She needs her medication. She's old and confused. Jack muted the television. The silence flooded the room like a physical weight. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, a bowl of kibble in his hand. Beside him, Sasha raised her head. She was recovering well. The spark was back in her eyes, and she nudged Jack's elbow, demanding a scratch behind the ears. He's good, isn't he? Jack murmured to the dog. Oscar-worthy performance. But the reality outside the house was less amusing. Marcus had done his homework. By framing the narrative around an unstable veteran and a stolen support animal, he had weaponized public sympathy. Jack's phone had been ringing off the hook all afternoon. Strange numbers, reporters, and death threats. He had unplugged the landline. Online, the hashtag Bring Sasha Home was trending locally. People who had never met Marcus Thorne were calling for Jack's arrest, posting pictures of his truck, and sharing his address on community forums. A sudden, jarring crash shattered the quiet. The glass from the front bay window imploded inward, showering the hardwood floor with fragments. Sasha scrambled to her feet, letting out a deep, warning bark, immediately putting herself between the window and the puppy pen. Jack didn't flinch or yell. He moved with the economy of motion that combat had ingrained in him. He grabbed Sasha by the collar, pulling her back into the safety of the hallway. Stay, he commanded firmly. He moved to the window, staying low, and peered out through the shattered pane. A sedan was speeding away, its taillights disappearing into the riverside fog. On the floor, among the glittering shards of glass, was a brick wrapped in duct tape. A piece of paper was taped to it. Jack picked it up. Scrawled in black marker were the words, "Dog thief, baby killer. We're watching you." Jack crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. He got a sheet of plywood and a drill from his basement. He had been prepared for this after the phone call in Chapter 4, and calmly boarded up the window. He didn't call the police. He knew that right now the police were under pressure to see him as the aggressor, thanks to Marcus's media stunt. Instead, he sat back down at his kitchen table and opened his laptop. He initiated a secure video call. The screen flickered to life, revealing Commander Mac O'Connell. Mac was a JAG officer based out of the Philadelphia Navy Yard, a man with mahogany skin and a salt and pepper buzz cut. He'd been Jack's CO in Afghanistan, and was now one of the sharpest legal minds in the Navy. I saw the news, Jack, Mac said, his voice a low, steadying rumble. They're painting a masterpiece of. They've filed a civil suit for return of property and an emergency restraining order. They're also pushing the D.A. To press charges for grand larceny. That break-in footage you sent me yesterday helps with self-defense regarding the two thugs, but it doesn't prove ownership of the dog. Marcus has the paperwork. You have a good Samaritan story. Jack leaned forward. I have the memory card, Mac. I have Catherine's video. Mac sighed, rubbing his face. I've reviewed it. It's powerful, Jack, but it's hearsay. It proves she wanted to change the will, and it proves she was afraid of abuse, but it doesn't prove Marcus actually abused the dog on that particular day. A judge could look at Marcus's tears on TV and return the dog to the legal owner pending a probate hearing. If Marcus got Sasha back, even for a day, she'd be dead. We need a smoking gun. We need proof of what happened on that sidewalk. Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He looked over at Sasha, who had settled back down near the puppies, trusting him completely. He was losing. He was winning the physical battles, but losing the war of perception. Just then, his laptop chimed with an incoming email notification. It was from an unknown address. The subject line of the email was simply, I saw what he did. Jack frowned and clicked it open. The body of the email was short. Mr. Renner, I live 3 houses down from the Thorne estate. I was backing out of my driveway when you stopped your truck. I saw the news tonight. I saw that man lie to the whole city. I don't know you, but I know what I saw. My Tesla records everything. Attached is a video file. Jack downloaded it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He hit play. The footage was high definition, taken from the side repeater camera of a parked car. It showed the sun-drenched street in Bryn Mawr. It showed Marcus Thorne dragging Sasha to the gate. It showed the puppies tumbling onto the hot concrete. And then, as clear as day, it showed Marcus draw back, swing his leg, and deliver a brutal, full-force kick to Sasha's ribs. It showed Sasha crawling over her puppies to shield them. It showed Marcus laughing, actually laughing, before slamming the gate. The timestamp was verified. The location was verified. It was objective, irrefutable proof of felony animal cruelty. The email was signed simply, Mrs. Peterson, I am willing to testify. Mrs. Peterson was a widow in her 70s, known in the neighborhood for her prize-winning roses and her absolute intolerance for nonsense. She had seen the news, saw Marcus's crocodile tears, and decided she had lived too long to let a bully win. Jack let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 days. The tight coil of tension in his chest unwound. He forwarded the file to Mac instantly. Mac, Jack said, his voice level once more. Check your inbox. I think we just found our smoking gun. On the screen, Mac opened the file. A slow, predatory grin spread across the lawyer's face. Oh, this is beautiful, Mac whispered. Jack, don't worry about the window. By tomorrow morning, Marcus Thorne isn't going to be worried about a dog anymore. He's going to be worried about jail time. The Philadelphia County Courthouse stood like a limestone monolith against the brilliant blue sky, its glass facade reflecting the city that had been so quick to judge Jack Renner. Outside, the media circus was in full swing. News vans idled with satellite dishes extended, and reporters jockeyed for position on the steps, hungry for the conclusion to the viral dog napping story. Inside courtroom 504, the air was hermetically sealed and freezing cold. The air conditioning hummed a low, sterile note that did nothing to cool the tension crackling between the 2 tables at the front of the room. Marcus Thorne sat at the plaintiff's table, looking the picture of aggrieved dignity. He wore a charcoal gray suit that whispered money, his hair perfectly coiffed, his expression one of dignified patience. Beside him was his lawyer, Landon Price. Price was a man who looked like he'd been manufactured in a boardroom, sharp lines, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a reputation for burying opponents under mountains of paperwork. He tapped a gold pen against his legal pad, exuding the confidence of a man who had never lost a case involving property rights. On the other side of the aisle, Jack Renner sat as still as a statue. He wore his dress blues, the uniform pressed to a razor's edge, the ribbons on his chest a colorful testament to a lifetime of service the media had conveniently forgotten. He wasn't looking at the cameras in the courtroom. He was looking straight ahead at the empty judge's bench. Beside him, Commander Mac O'Connell arranged his files with military precision. Mac looked less like a lawyer and more like a tank commander who had wandered into a library, but his eyes were sharp, sweeping the courtroom with a tactical assessment that missed nothing. In the back row, Amber Lynn sat with a large pair of sunglasses perched on her head, scrolling nervously through her phone, her foot tapping a frantic rhythm on the floor. She had sensed a shift in the wind, and self-preservation was her only true allegiance. All rise, the bailiff called out, his voice echoing off the mahogany paneling. Judge Elena Rodriguez entered the room. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that had seen every lie a human being could tell. She took her seat, adjusted her robes, and looked over her glasses at the assembled parties. "We are here for the emergency hearing regarding the motion for return of property filed by Mr. Thorne against Mr. Renner," she stated, her voice dry and authoritative. "Mr. Price, you may proceed." Landon Price stood, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. He painted a tragic picture. He spoke of Marcus's profound grief, of an old, confused dog wandering out of an open gate, and of Jack Renner, a stranger with a history of violence, seizing the animal and refusing to return it. "Your Honor," Price concluded, smooth as silk. "This is a simple case of property rights. The dog, Sasha, is registered to the Thorne estate. Mr. Renner has no legal claim. We demand the immediate return of the animal and a restraining order against the defendant." Marcus took the stand. He was magnificent in his deception. He dabbed at a tear as he spoke of his late wife. When asked about the dog's injuries, he shook his head sadly. "I don't know how she was hurt," he lied, his voice trembling just enough. "She ran out the gate when the gardener left it open. I tried to catch her, but I tripped. I think Mr. Renner may have injured her when he captured her. She's a big dog. She would have struggled." He looked at Jack with a mixture of fear and pity. "I just want her home. She's all I have left of Catherine." The courtroom murmured in sympathy. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Price sat down, looking smug. He believed the case was closed. Max stood up. He didn't swagger. He walked to the lectern. "Your Honor," Max said, his voice a low rumble that filled the room without needing theatrical flair. "The plaintiff argues this is a simple property case. He is correct, but the question is not who owns the dog, but who has rights to the dog under the terms of the owner's will." Price shot to his feet. "Objection. Irrelevant. The will is in probate, and Mr. Thorne is the sole beneficiary." Judge Rodriguez held up a hand. "Overruled. I'll allow it. Get to the point, Commander." Mac nodded. "First, regarding the accident Mr. Thorne has described." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. The defense submits Exhibit A, surveillance footage provided by Mrs. Peterson, a neighbor who witnessed the incident from her vehicle. Marcus's face went white. He froze in the witness box. The bailiff dimmed the lights and a large screen on the wall flickered to life. The video was high definition and unforgiving. It showed the sunny street. It showed Marcus dragging Sasha. It showed the puppies tumbling. And then a collective gasp went through the courtroom. The sound was audible even without speakers. A collective intake of breath as Marcus Thorne, grieving widower, swung his leg back and kicked the helpless, cowering dog with the force of a penalty shot. The video showed him laughing. It showed him slamming the gate. The silence that followed the clip was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Marcus stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked at the jury box, but the jurors were looking at him with expressions ranging from horror to pure disgust. That's doctored," Marcus stammered, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. It was attacking me. The video shows it was shielding its puppies, Mr. Thorne," Judge Rodriguez said, her voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. "Sit down. We are not finished, Your Honor." Mac continued relentlessly. "Mr. Thorne has made a claim that the defendant stole a leather collar. He has been very anxious to retrieve it. Now we know why." Mac produced a certified copy and a transcript of the video file found in the collar. The collar contained a digital diary of the late Catherine Thorne, but more importantly, it contained the location of the true final will, which was retrieved yesterday from safe deposit box 404 at First National Bank under a court order I obtained. Mac held up a blue-backed legal document. "This will, dated 1 week before her death, supersedes all others." Mac began to read, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. "I, Catherine Thorne, being of sound mind, do bequeath my entire estate, including liquid assets of $5 million and the property in Bryn Mawr, to the Philadelphia Animal Welfare Society." A shocked murmur rippled through the room. Amber Lynn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus turned a shade of gray that matched his suit. However, Mac continued, reading the clause that twisted the knife. "Mr. Thorne is to be granted a stipend and right of residence in the home on the sole condition that he cares for my dog, Sasha, and her offspring, with love and respect for the remainder of their natural lives. Should any evidence of abuse, neglect, or abandonment be found, or should the animals be removed from the home due to his actions, the stipend is revoked. His right of residence is immediately terminated, and he shall receive nothing." Mac closed the file. "Your Honor, Mr. Thorne didn't just kick a dog. He kicked away $5 million. He attempted to destroy the condition of his inheritance. By abandoning Sasha and her puppies, and by physically assaulting them, as proven by the video, he has triggered the disinheritance clause, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. Amber Lynn stood up, gave Marcus a look of pure venom, and walked out of the courtroom, the click of her heels a hasty retreat from a sinking ship. Marcus slumped in his chair, a man whose life had been demolished in the space of 10 minutes. He looked to Landon Price, but his lawyer was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from the toxic client. Judge Rodriguez slammed her gavel, not to quiet the room, but to deliver a verdict that landed like a hammer blow. "I have seen quite enough," she declared, glaring at Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, you are a disgrace. Not only am I denying your motion for return of property, I am issuing an immediate order granting full legal custody of Sasha and her puppies to Mr. Jack Renner, who has proven to be their only true protector." She paused, leaning forward. "Furthermore, I am referring the video evidence and the transcript of this hearing to the district attorney's office. You are to be remanded into custody pending charges of felony animal cruelty, perjury, and attempted fraud. Bailiff, take him away." As the bailiff moved to handcuff Marcus, Jack finally looked at him. There was no triumph in Jack's eyes, just a grim satisfaction. He stood and buttoned his jacket. He had done what he promised. He had protected the pack. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed a little brighter now, illuminating the truth that had finally been dragged out of the shadows. The golden hour had settled over the Jersey shore, painting the wide stretch of white sand in dreamlike shades of peach and violet. To the west, the Atlantic was a vast, rippling sheet of hammered copper, pulsing against the shore with a rhythm both ancient and soothing. It was a perfect South Jersey evening, the kind that made you forget the world existed anywhere but at the water's edge. 3 months had passed since the sterile chill of the courtroom and the gavel strike that had shattered Marcus Thorne's life, and the world had turned, as it always does, toward the light. For Jack Renner, standing knee-deep in the surf, the shadows of desert mountains and the gray gloom of his own solitude felt like a lifetime ago. He wore a pair of faded board shorts and a smile that felt foreign on his own face, an expression of genuine joy that reached his hazel eyes, softening the vigilant lines that had defined him for so long. He held a bright orange frisbee in his hand, his muscles coiling as he prepared to send it sailing into the salt-laced wind. "Ready," Jack called out, his voice carried away by the breeze, but his intent was clear to the 4 pairs of eyes riveted upon him. "Go," he flicked his wrist, the plastic disc soaring out over the waves. Instantly, the beach exploded in a flurry of fur and sand. The 3 German Shepherd puppies, now 5 months old, clumsy, long-limbed, and entering their awkward teenage phase, scrambled after it, tripping over their own paws and barking with high-pitched yelps. Jack had named them in honor of the city where they'd finally found safety. Rocky, the male with a golden coat that matched the sunrise, Libby, the female with light tan markings, and Frankie, whose dark sable coat shimmered like deep water. They were a chaotic force of nature, full of life and mischief, completely unaware of the cruelty that had nearly ended their lives before their eyes were even open. But ahead of them, slicing through the water with the grace of a seal and the power of a wolf, was Sasha. Sasha was unrecognizable from the gaunt, broken creature Jack had scraped off the sidewalk in Bryn Mawr. Her coat had grown back thick and glossy, a rich carpet of black and tan that gleamed in the sun. The shaved patch on her flank, where surgeons had repaired her ribs, was gone, covered by new fur, leaving no visible scar of the violence she had endured. She moved without a limp, her stride long and easy as she leapt through the breaking waves, snatching the frisbee from the air, inches from the water's surface, before Rocky or Libby could get there. She turned in the surf, water sluicing from her muscular frame, and trotted back to Jack, her tail held high in a slow, proud rhythm. She dropped the toy into his hand and sat, looking up at him with amber eyes that held a depth of intelligence and devotion that still took Jack's breath away. There was no fear in her gaze anymore, only the absolute, unshakable trust of a dog who knew she was home. Jack threw the frisbee again for the puppies, but he kept Sasha by his side for a moment, burying his hand in the thick ruff of fur on her neck. He looked up toward the dunes, where the boardwalk snaked along the shoreline. Life had a funny way of balancing the scales, he thought. Earlier that week, Jack had been driving through one of the city parks in Philadelphia on his way to the bridge. He'd seen a crew of workers in bright orange vests picking up trash along the roadway under the supervision of a sheriff's deputy. And there, spearing discarded soda cans with a stick, looking sunburned, miserable, and utterly defeated, was Marcus Thorne. The mighty had fallen. The conviction for animal cruelty had come swiftly, followed by a sentence that stripped him of his dignity rather than just his freedom. He'd avoided jail time by pleading no contest, but the judge had thrown the book at him. 3 years probation, massive fines that had drained his personal accounts, and 500 hours of community service. But the real blow had been the loss of the estate. The Philadelphia Animal Welfare Society, armed with Catherine's will and a court order, had taken possession of the Bryn Mawr mansion. It was being sold. The proceeds would fund a new wing for their veterinary hospital and a sanctuary for abused dogs. Marcus had been evicted with nothing but the clothes on his back and a reputation so toxic no country club in the state would have him. And Amber Lynn, she had vanished the moment the gavel came down. Rumor was she was in Miami on the arm of a plastic surgeon, leaving Marcus to face the wreckage alone. It was a cold, poetic justice. Marcus had treated living things like disposable accessories, and in the end, he had been disposed of by the very people he had tried so hard to impress. Jack felt no need to gloat. Seeing Marcus in that orange vest, picking up other people's garbage, had been closure enough. The monster was just a man now, and a small one at that. "Come on, bud. Give it here." Jack laughed as Rocky tackled his leg, fighting for the frisbee. The puppy growled playfully, yanking on the plastic with needle-sharp teeth. Jack gently wrestled him to the sand, letting the dog win for a moment before retrieving the toy. He walked up the beach toward the dry sand where he'd left his towel and boots near the stone seawall that separated the beach from the historic hotel behind them. He sat on the warm concrete wall, watching the sun begin its final descent. The sky turned a fiery orange, casting long, stretching shadows across the beach. The air grew cooler, crisp with the coming evening. Sasha trotted up from the water's edge, followed by the 3 exhausted puppies who collapsed in a heap of wet sand at Jack's feet. Sasha, however, wasn't done. She walked right up to where Jack was sitting, looked him dead in the eye with a mischievous glint, and shook. It was a full-body, nose-to-tail shudder that sent a galaxy of cold seawater flying everywhere, soaking Jack's shirt and face. "Hey, Sasha." Jack sputtered, laughing as he wiped the water from his eyes. "You did that on purpose." Sasha didn't back away. She moved closer, invading his personal space in a way only a German shepherd can, and pressed her wet forehead hard against his chest. She let out a long sigh, leaning her full weight against him. Jack stopped laughing. He wrapped his arms around the big dog, resting his chin on the top of her head. He smelled the ocean, and wet fur, and the simple, honest scent of life. For years, ever since he had come back from his last deployment, Jack had felt a hollow space in his chest, a silence in his house that no amount of noise could fill. He had thought he was broken, destined to be the lone soldier living on the fringes of the world. But sitting here, soaked in seawater, with 3 puppies chewing on his bootlaces and the steady beat of Sasha's heart against his chest, the silence was gone. He realized he hadn't just rescued them. They had pulled him out of the darkness just as surely as he had pulled them off that hot sidewalk. "We made it, girl," Jack whispered into her fur. "We're okay." Sasha licked his hand, a rough, warm gesture of agreement. The sun slipped below the horizon, setting the ocean on fire one last time before dusk. On the sand, 5 shadows stretched long and unbroken, 1 man and 4 dogs, separate but connected, merged into a single unit. They were a pack. And as the first stars began to prick the violet sky, Jack Renner knew that for the first time in a very long time, he was exactly where he was supposed to be.